Hello students, I want to show you how to incorporate a quotation or a paraphrase as textual support. Now we're beginning to do some more scholarly academic writing. We're stepping it up a little bit. When you respond to your readings, you're going to be asked to respond and support your point with some kind of textual reference. That is a quotation or a paraphrase for now. I'm going to try and keep it simple. And for instance, you might make a point that Ralph Ellison describes the racism that he met going to the zoo, and you could have a quotation of the zoo guard telling him that he had to leave the zoo because he didn't have any white folks with him. And that would be great support for your point about how he experienced racism. So let's show you how to do that. There's 3 easy steps to begin. First, you're going to construct a signal phrase to introduce the quote or paraphrase. The signal phrase is your frame, okay? It's the beginning of the frame around your quotation or paraphrase or your borrowed material. You can never just drop a quotation into the middle of a paragraph because we need to know where the quotation is coming from and who is talking in the quotation. So a signal phrase is absolutely essential. Otherwise, you commit the error of the drop quotation. We don't want to do that. Second thing, you want to copy the quotation word for word if you're surrounding it with quotation marks. If you're not borrowing the language but giving the import of the passage in your own words, you still have to cite because it's borrowed information, it's borrowed ideas. So you don't need quotations if you put the borrowed information in your own words, but you do need the signal phrase and the in-text citation because it's borrowed ideas. Last, you're going to follow the quotation or paraphrase with a parenthetical citation, which is called in Modern Language Association the in-text citation, and follow that with a period. That's how you frame your quotation. Signal phrase, quotation or paraphrase, in-text citation. And later on, there's a 4th piece to this little puzzle, and that's the works cited citation, but I'm not going to teach that right now. But I'm just going to take this one step at a time, and this is how to incorporate borrowed material as support for your points. And that's what you're going to be required to do for your essay test this week. Alright, so the first step, you construct a signal phrase to introduce the quote. The signal phrase should have the author's name in it and something about the author, so we know that this person is a credentialed person or somebody we really would want to listen to. For example, Alice Walker is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Color Purple, and that information I put in my signal phrase so that my readers would understand I was quoting someone who knew what she was talking about. If you need examples of some more signal phrases and some verbs to use in signal phrases, see page 383 orange top in Writer's Reference for model signal phrases and verbs for signal phrases. Sometimes you may be quoting from a website when you start doing research for me, and I just want you to know that if a website is mentioned, the credentials need to be explained in the website. Why should we listen to the website? Tell us about that website. Not all websites are worth listening to. So you have to prove that your website is a decent source. So the ePolicy Institute, that's a website, is an organization that advises companies about reducing risks from technology. So that would be a very good website to use if you're writing a paper about technology. But explain in your signal phrase who and or what that website is. More examples of signal phrases from authors in your text. Gretel Ehrlich, a freelance journalist, suggests. Ralph Ellison, a prize-winning author, describes. William Glaberson, a technology writer for the New York Times, reports. And also, towards the end of the semester, you're going to be citing research from scholarly journals. I'm going to show you how to find them in databases. And the signal phrase should have the author's or researcher's credentials when you're doing research and documentation. And the credentials are, that means that this is an expert in the field. This guy or this woman is a pro. And you want to establish his or her credibility for your audience, all right? So here's an example. Marty Seligman, past president of the American Psychology Association and professor of psychology at University of Pennsylvania, reports that, okay, so this guy is really accredited. He's past president of the APA, and he's also a professor of psych at a Ivy League university. There's someone we want to listen to when he talks about positive psychology, for example. Here's another signal phrase from some scholarly research. Another author in our text is Deborah Tannen, a professor of psycholinguistics at Georgetown University and author of 9 books on communication styles. she informs us that women and men's communication styles differ. Now notice I paraphrase that. It's not a quote. I have the signal phrase in italics just so you can see and distinguish it from the paraphrase, and then I have it followed by an in-text citation. So step 2 is after you make the signal phrase, you're going to copy the quotation word for word from the text and surround that with quotation marks. For example, Alice Walker. Once you give the credentials, you don't have to give it the second time. So we all know who Alice Walker is from earlier on in this presentation. Alice Walker says, and I quote, "I am eating misery," end quote. And I'm talking about her and her viewing of animals. And, you know, just thinking about factory farms and pigs, so you could really understand what she's saying here. All right, more examples of step 2. William Glaberson reports, quote, "Sean Miller was never charged with a crime," end quote. Ralph Ellison describes, quote, "the incongruity aroused by your having to walk past a school to get to a school." And so you see that the quotes or the paraphrases follow your signal phrase. Now, remember this about paraphrasing, which is putting borrowed information into your own words. Not a lot of borrowed information, just a small passage. So if you put borrowed information in your own words, you still need a signal phrase and an in-text citation. Don't ever forget that, because you'll be cited for plagiarism. All right, for example, I put this passage in my own words. Alice Walker, a writer of myriad novels and books of poetry, does not eat meat because she feels the animals were enslaved. And I found that on page 356 in your text. So step 3 is to follow the quotation or paraphrase with the page number in parentheses. There is no P in the parentheses. There is no PP in the parentheses. There is no P dot in the parentheses. There is no word page. It is just a page number. If you have the author in the signal phrase, you only need a page number in the in-text citation. So you would put a period after that, the parentheses. Let me show you what that looks like. All right, here we go. William Glaberson reports Sean Miller was never charged with a crime. And look carefully at the punctuation here. You close your parentheses right here before you you close your quotation marks before you start your parentheses. Page number, close parentheses, period. Ralph Ellison describes, and I quote, "the incongruity aroused by your having to walk past a school to get to a school," end quote, open parentheses, page 235 in the text, close parentheses, period. And then this, I've already modeled Alice Walker for you. One more example of step 3 is Greta Ehrlich, also a writer in our book, describes her regaining consciousness and struck by lightning. See the quotation marks? That's for the title of an essay or a news article. Goes in quotation marks, like this. Quote, "A single heartbeat stirs gray water. Blue trickles in, just a tiny stream," end quote, open parentheses, page 141, no P's, close parentheses, period. And that's how it's supposed to look in academic writing. So you have a lot of visual examples, and I hope that that helps you understand how to incorporate a quote to support your point. Maybe I was making a point about how Greta Ehrlich is a beautiful writer and can describe states of consciousness like water. Very beautiful writing she is. All right, review. So let's review this. Incorporating quotation or a paraphrase as textual support to a point you've made in your essay responses or your essays themselves. Step 1, construct a signal phrase to introduce the quote or paraphrase, being sure to name the author and using a signal phrase verb from Writer's Reference, page 383. You want to include credentials if you're borrowing from a scholarly journal article, which you will be doing but for essay 4. If there is no author, use the title of the article and the signal phrase, but you all have authors in your text, so that doesn't, you don't have to worry about that right now. But notice that if you don't have an author, say when you're later on in essay 4, you might be quoting from a website that has no author, then you would use the title of the article from the website in your signal phrase. Okay? There's so many rules. But let's keep it easy with 1, 2, 3. So if there is no author, use the title of the article and the signal phrase. The titles of articles have quotation marks around them. And I left that there on its own so that you could see that's what you will be doing coming up, but you don't have to know this particular slide right now. But in case the question popped up, what if there's no author? Well, now you know. Step 2. Step 1 was the signal phrase. Step 2 is copying the quotation word for word, surrounding it with quotation marks, or paraphrasing the borrowed material into your own words. And step 3 is follow the quotation or the borrowed material by the page number in parentheses. followed by a period. All right, here's your final example. Here's our author, our signal phrase, our quotation, and our in-text citation. So I'm talking about Annie Dillard's piece, and I want to give an example of her not understanding life by the misery that she witnesses. So Annie Dillard, a prolific writer and well-published essayist, in trying to understand life asks, and I quote, "Will someone please explain to Alan MacDonald in his dignity, to the dear at Providentia in his dignity, what is going on, and mail me the carbon?" Close quotations, open parentheses, 138 in your text, close parentheses, period. Now, time for you to write to me and let me know what part of this presented new information that you could use. Be very specific in your responses. You're going to email me in Blackboard with that. And which part of this presentation may still be unclear. Is there something I can clarify for you one-on-one in an email? I would be happy to. And the reason we use the logo CAT for CATS is because this is called a classroom assessment technique. Classroom assessment technique. And what that does is it gives feedback to the presenter to see if anything needs a point of clarification. All right, students, I look forward to hearing from you.